Welcome to or welcome back to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. If you don't know who I am, my name is Will France, and I'm here to help you train a little better for your next ultra marathon so you can avoid injury or recover from injury and just have more fun out on the trails. This week on the podcast, I have Faith Raymond, and one of the first things I'm going to say is if you've ever spoken to me on the phone or know me, you know that I have a bit of a potty mouth, to put it mildly, and Faith is the same way. So we both just kind of let it fly here. If you are with children or you don't particularly enjoy profanity, then this is probably not the one for you, or this is to be listened to at a later time when you're not in front of sensitive ears. Second, we are talking about menopause and training through menopause. If you or someone you know is a female who runs really far, I think you're going to get a lot out of this one. It is a topic that I've talked about a little bit because I've taken a bunch of education courses on the topic, but I certainly can't speak to it from personal experience in any way. I am not a female, and even if I were, I am not old enough yet to have gone through menopause. So it was super helpful to have Faith on the podcast to teach me and everyone listening to this a little bit more about training through that life cycle. Faith is great. She and I met at the US Ultra Running Coaches Conference a week ago at the time of this recording, and I definitely wanted to get her on to talk about this topic. So I'm going to introduce her a little bit more in a minute, so let's get into the podcast. Welcome to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. My name is Will France, and I'm here to help you improve your training so you can have more fun out on the trails. This week on the podcast, we have Faith Raymond. I met her last week at the USCA Coaches Conference for ultra runners, and we immediately hit it off at a food hall and for a bunch of reasons, and we're going to talk about a lot of that today. So I'm going to bury the lead a little bit so y'all keep listening. So Faith, tell me a little bit about yourself. I feel like we hit it off partially because you and I came at this from not the standard background, like we weren't professional high-level runners who decided to coach. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
So first of all, thanks for having me on, Will.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Pleasure. I think it's going to be fun and informative for your listeners to hear what we're going to talk about. So
fair warning, I think Faith and I are probably going to swear a bit because she actually has the mouth like me a little bit, so not quite as bad, but just probably not a kiddo's one. All right, go ahead.
Hide the children if you have them. So I've not been a lifelong runner at all. I have been a lifelong athlete in different sports. I've ridden horses all my life since I was probably around 7 years old, and kind of did it all in that space, not competitively, but did it all. I rode every discipline there was. I did a little bit of driving. At the end of my riding career, I started doing endurance races.
Okay.
So you may have heard of like the Tevis Cup and the Vermont 100 and things like that have the equine component. I never did Tevis Cup, by the way. I have done Vermont, but I never did the Tevis Cup. That's with Western States. If anyone doesn't know that, it used to be held in conjunction on the same day on the same trail. And Old Dominion also had one of those horse race, foot race on the same day on the same trail. Vermont is the only one left of its kind. The other races have split. They have them on different days, but
does Old Dominion still do theirs?
I'm sorry?
Does Old Dominion still do their horse race?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I don't know because I've been removed from that world for a while. That's kind of what led me to running. Actually, I retired my equine partner. I really wasn't in the place in my life to bring up a new one and continue competing in that space. So at the same time, my hometown in Massachusetts was hit by an EF3 tornado, which is a little unheard of in that area. And about a month or so after that, I started seeing talk on the Facebook page about having a benefit 5K. And I'm like, oh, I think I would like to do that. Hence my entrance into the running world.
Okay. First, I guess, like, is everybody okay from that tornado? Like, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
5K,
Okay.
10K, half marathon,
Awesome.
all of that. And this was in 2011 is when the tornado happened. So that's when I started running, 2011. You do the math to figure out how old I am, because I can't do the math. I was probably, I don't know, 45, 46, somewhere around there.
Okay.
Probably 46.
And that's when you started running.
That's when I started running. So very late in life.
Great.
Probably close to perimenopause. But having not really done anything athletically that would interfere with, I never really paid much attention to it, to be quite honest. But I did travel the route that most road runners travel, right? You want to qualify for the Boston Marathon. I probably tried 8 or 9 times. Again, to quote Albert Einstein, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Yeah. So didn't change the training. I just kept banging my head against the wall and kept coming up short. Finally, I'm like, fuck it. If I can't go faster, I'm going to go longer. So that's when I broke into ultra running, and fell in love with the sport, obviously.
I love that. So I don't know, I thought about the whole marathon on a road thing, and like my knees yell at me at the thought, much less doing it. So and that's not a running is bad for your knees comment. That is a my knees are broken comment. So that's just not stellar. That's why I run trails. But yeah, so how long did you try to do that for those 8 attempts, and like what did that work look like trying to push into that?
Yeah, so you're asking my senior brain to actually remember things from a while ago. It was probably, I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
I would do like 2 marathons a year, which of course even the elites don't do that. They do 1 and focus on it. But you know what? It became very clear to me. So my first marathon was obviously very slow.
As it should be.
Relatively speaking, not trying to slow shame anybody, but relatively speaking.
No, not at all. I'm slow as hell at a marathon distance, absolutely.
And so it was like 4:41, I think. And then 3 months later, I did another one at 4:13. Nice. So I'm like, oh, I'm getting closer, because my time at the time was 4 hours. So, and each consequent marathon after that, given if everything else was equal, same type of terrain, same type of weather, that kind of thing, I was right in the 4:20 range. I was just not, it was clear I was not going to get any faster than that.
Got it.
So yeah. And just a footnote for you saying, I can't run a marathon because pavement so the race that Nick talked about in the presentation, his presentation about lung function, like, is a 50-mile on pavement.
Yeah, I don't know. And like, I have people who do it and I think it's great. It's just like my knees are so damaged, and like I know I could make it better, but I have no interest in doing the work to get there.
I don't blame you at all.
That 50 miles on pavement, like,
it's not fun.
No,
I'll just say that.
I'm not into it.
It's not fun.
For those who are, power to you, but yeah, that's not my jam.
Yep.
Great.
Amen.
So I understand that. I don't really have the drive to get fast in marathon either. And if we look at like your shift to trails, so you're like, I'm going to go longer. Where did that go from there? If we're at 26, did you go to 50K? Did you get a coach? Yes. Did you like try to hop scouts to 100? Like, what do we got?
Yeah, no. So I did 50K. My first 50K was at Pinelands Trail Running Festival, which no longer exists in that iteration. I chose it because it was fairly benign. I am not a good technical single track trail runner. I will tell you that right now. Broken ankle, broken wrist, 2 broken shoulders. not a good single track runner.
Is that from the horse riding?
No, that's
Okay.
from running.
Okay. Super fun. Great.
Yeah, that's from running. And bonus, I do not have osteoporosis. I've had a DEXA scan.
Oh yeah.
I would say every peri and postmenopausal woman should try to get one somewhere. They're very hard to come by, but it's a great idea so that you can get, not only do you get your body composition, but you get your bone mineral density as well. So
we have them at one of the jobs where I work occasionally.
Yeah,
like they come to a portable, and
that's great.
Everybody wants them for the fat mass thing. And I was like, honestly, if I could throw that page out for most people, I would. But if I could get your bone density, it's worth it. So yeah, 100%.
I just have shitty luck. It's just the way it is. I fall and I break.
I'm sorry, Faith, laugh, but yeah, that's fair. I get it.
It's true.
My tendon history is very similar. So yeah, I feel you. Sometimes you just don't have great luck with certain substrates in your body. Yeah. So how did you, I mean, that's a long list. How did you recover from all those? And how long did it take?
Well, it wasn't all at once. That's the,
I mean, I figured, yes.
Yeah, that's the shit, right? It was one after another. So because I'm so healthy, I have a healthy lifestyle. I eat a lot of nutrient dense foods. I spend a lot of time outside. I weight lift. I do, all of the things. I healed very quickly, like 6 or 7 weeks. I mean, I ran a 5K 3 weeks after I broke my wrist. Wasn't supposed to, but I did it anyway.
Good for you. That's great. That's really cool.
Yeah. And I was crutching when I broke my ankle. My husband drove us home from the medical center, and I immediately went out and crutched like a mile around the parking lot because I was just like, I'm not going to let this stop me. And I had a walking boot on, so I was on the track like the next day walking. My husband's just like, oh my God.
So I actually love this so much. As someone who, I work with a lot of like the middle between trying to get real strong and actual PT stuff. So I do a lot of that like in between space, and movement helps so much. And I feel like we often end up in this idea that you need to fully rest or whatever. And like, sure, sometimes you do. If your doctor tells you to, please do that. But also movement really helps. My dad was a PT for 40 years. And one of the best things he ever taught me was like, as soon as you can move somewhat normally, like get on it and do it as much as it can without a ton of pain, and you will heal faster. And it's proven really true.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So unfortunately, those experiences have kind of carried over, into, I've had a couple of DNFs where I was like, if I could have run faster on the single track, maybe, because it's time. I just got pulled for time. Maybe I could have, but I don't let it stop me. I just choose races that suit my strengths, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. So like, where did we go from like a 50K? I know you're running hundreds now. So like, what did that progression look like?
I want to say mostly normal.
Whatever that means.
Well, I ran a few 50Ks, and then so being where I live, the part of the country that I live in, and the fact that I already had a previous relationship with the Vermont 100 and its charity, the Vermont Adaptive Ski and Sports. That race was actually founded as a benefit fundraiser for that charity. So anything that the Vermont 100 does is for Vermont Adaptive Ski and Sports. And that's both the horse race and the foot race.
Awesome.
So I already had a relationship with that event and with the charity. So when I broke into ultra running, the Vermont 100 was kind of, that became my holy grail. That became my Boston Marathon, was the Vermont 100. So I did a few 50Ks, and then I found out that the race organization had added a 100K to that event. So I immediately put my money down. And I'm like, okay, That's
awesome.
going to be
Nice.
So I skipped the 50-mile distance. I have gone back and I've done a bunch of 50s since, but I kind of skipped over that and went right for the 100K, and then kind of bounced around and did a few 100Ks, did more 50Ks. I'm the kind of person that orders the same thing in restaurants. So I tend to go back to races that I love,
Right.
whether it's the race itself or the charity or the community or whatever. So I've redone a few 50Ks, I've done a few 50-milers, and then signed up for my first 100, which coincidentally was not the Vermont 100.
I feel like that's a surprise, honestly. Like, which one did you end up doing first?
So I did Ghost Train in New
Okay.
Hampshire first.
Why that one?
I think because a lot of my friends were going.
Cool.
I had done a huge amount of training with my friend Laura. This is back when I lived in Connecticut, and she wanted to do it as well. So we actually did our first Vermont 100K together. We ran almost every step together, and we ran almost every step of the 100-miler together as well. I just, not going to lie, the Vermont 100-miler scared me just a little bit. It scared me just a little bit.
What about it? I don't know too much about that race. I know it's like very, it has a long history and everything, but I honestly like not looked up too much in the Northeast because I don't coach a ton of people up there. So yeah, what about it?
So it has 17,000 feet of elevation gain.
Fair.
Which is nothing when you think about like Hard Rock and all the, UTMB sure, and all these other, but holy shit.
Right there a few weeks ago. But yes, shit, 17 is still a lot, man.
And I lived, mind you, at the time, I lived in Shoreline, Connecticut, like the flat, right? Sure. So it was just like, my God, like, how am I going to train for something like this?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a little scary.
I get that.
That's why I didn't sign up for it.
So if we're looking at the Vermont 100, yeah, I know a lot of the trails back east are kind of notorious for being rooty and very technical. Does that apply to the Vermont as well?
No.
Okay.
Because it is 70% hard packed dirt roads.
Cool.
And probably 20% single track and 10% Jeep roads, somewhere in there. So absolutely not. And again, this is why, I targeted the 100K at that time, because it suited my strengths. I knew I'd already broken all the shit. Didn't want to break it again. So went into a lot. I've done some technical trail races, don't get me wrong, but I go into it with a lot of anxiety. And I make sure it's got a very long cutoff so that I don't get pulled.
Do you get, sorry, this is just a slight diversion, but like, do you get a lot of race anxiety in general, or is this just for those races?
No, I don't get race anxiety. I'm the person who sleeps a full 8 hours the night before a race.
That's not me, friend. Like, God. What do you think has like built that for you? Because I do feel like the race anxiety thing is, it's real. It's really common. I've had it during all the sports I've ever played. It's always like performance at the end game. Like what's kind of built that resilience?
I think it's just, now that's not to say that I don't have some anxiety during taper, right? Because that's when you usually have it. Oh my God, did I do enough? Did I not do enough? Did I pack right? Did I not pack right? The fuck do I want to eat at aid station number 4? Like, you go through all of that, right? Yes. Should I change my shoes? Should I buy new shorts? You do all of that during the taper crazies. So maybe that's what it is. I get it all out then, and then I'm exhausted before the race. I don't know. But I think that's part of it. I think that I just don't ruminate over that like the night before. The hay's in the barn. What's done is done. The best thing I can do for myself is get a good night's sleep. So
yeah, that's great. I mean, do you have a lot of athletes who deal with that anxiety? I mean, in the month leading up to races?
Oh yeah.
Whatever? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yep.
How do you help them deal with it?
I basically try and talk them through it the same way. Like I realize that what works for me may not work for them, but I do try to talk through it in that manner.
Yeah.
You know, look, and we have a couple of strategy calls leading into it, right? Maybe
Sure.
3 weeks out and maybe 2 weeks out. If you're going to, like, have you done your crew manual? Have you discussed, with your pacers what you want and what you don't want? Have you put together your drop bags? Have you picked out your race kit? Have you, considered the weather and whether you're going to need to dress more overnight and where you're going to put your headlamp? Like, we try to work through all of those details so that when it does get to 2 or 3 days before the race, they're not flipping out over that, and they hopefully can relax a little bit and pay attention to their fueling and their hydrating, and they're putting their feet up and not running around like a chicken with their head cut off 2 days before the race. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I think to some degree the anxiety is, and Justin Ross talks about it being almost a good thing, because it's like, it means you care, right? And like some healthy level of anxiety for you've never done this before. You can't like know if you're gonna kill it, right? So like, of course it's fucking there. But also, if it's ruining your entire training block because you're kind of scared of it, then that's a whole different thing, right? So that's kind of a conversation I've had with myself and other people, and it's just tough. And I don't know, it's a hard thing to balance.
And that's what I do tell them too when they call me or text me and say, I'm freaking out, I'm nervous. And I tell them, good, I'm glad. Because if you weren't nervous, I'd be worried that you were overconfident and going into it with this, I'm going to be the shit and I'm going to,
100%.
Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And as sometimes ultras are nothing but solving one problem after another and just getting to the finish line. So yeah, can go either way.
Absolutely. And I think the anxiety to some degree is honestly helpful. Like it sucks, but I've seen people who are overconfident and then they like don't plan their hydration, they don't plan their fueling, they don't plan any sodium, and then they end up in the hospital with rhabdo. That exact story, like I've seen a couple times. And if you were just a little more anxious, maybe you wouldn't have ended up in the fucking hospital with rhabdo. So I feel like, there's a healthy level there that actually makes you like respect this sport it's hard, man. It's supposed to be hard. Like it's
supposed to be hard,
So I think that's some of it.
But to quote A League of Their Own, the hard is what makes it great.
Absolutely. Exactly. Love that. So I brought you on, like, wanted to chat because you and I got along, but two, I want to talk about menopause because
don't we all?
Yeah. So amusingly enough, yes, apparently we do, because I've talked with a couple coaches post conference, both male, just for a note, and the general consensus was there should have been more conversation about menopause, because we were all like, one was Aaron Saft, his podcast is probably already out by the time I'm going to push this one, and then another one was like Brian Pacenti, and we got coffee afterwards, and we're all just like, so we talked about it for like 15 minutes at this like final Q&A thing because someone asked about it, and clearly we needed more on this shit, right? Like this is just not a thing that we talked enough or anything about, really, if we're being honest. And I know that you are a runner who is like trained through this, and I really wanted to talk to you about it because like we can talk about science all day long and how your hormones drop and progesterone and estrogen and like throw out all the shit and talk about scientific studies about training around your cycle, which, I mean, there's mixed on that. I think in general, like whether we take men or women talking about this, like Alyssa Olenek is one on Instagram who doesn't really doesn't favor programming around a cycle, because to some degree it is another version of like the pink tax, where people will try to sell you programming that costs more because you're a woman, because it pros around cycle, right? But like, if you struggle in your individual cycle, then we should do some shit about it. And then once we get into, and then all those studies tend to be more about like younger, actively menstruating females. Whereas once we get to like peri and post, it's fucking chaos, to like quote a dietitian I talked about. Like your hormones are just fucking chaos. We see this like
Yes.
general downward trend, but it's like 5 to 10
Right.
years
But they
of
do
what the
this.
fuck
Yeah.
is happening.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so how what's your experience like? What's your experience with other athletes who deal with this? Like, how do you program a little bit around this? I would
Sure.
love to hear about it.
Sure.
Hey everyone, I've decided to stop doing ads for this podcast, at least for the time being. I just don't think they're a good use of anybody's time. So instead of that, I just have a simple ask. If you find this information valuable, please tell someone about it. Either hit the like or subscribe buttons on your preferred platform, share it with somebody, or you could even just head over to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Group on Facebook, and I'd appreciate that as well. I'm just trying to make more good, free information for people so we can all get better at running on the trails. And if we can spread the tribe, that would be great. Thank you, and let's get to the podcast.
So I agree with you in the respect that, I will never charge extra, right, for a woman's plan. However, I would be irresponsible if I didn't give my athletes the best programming that I can give them.
Yes.
Sometimes that means, doing things a little differently around their cycle. Others don't seem to be bothered by it, right? Despite what our physiology says, despite that our physiology says we maybe physically feel stronger, or your body reacts a different way during, the luteal phase as opposed to the follicular phase. But you know what? At the end of the day, some of our athletes just can't handle that, right? They have busy lives. They don't want to, they more or less want to kind of know what's coming down the pike. So for you to be changing things on a daily or weekly basis can sometimes just throw them into a tailspin. So as with everything, it's a case by case basis. First of all, does the athlete want it? Do they have the bandwidth to handle it? And if they do, then we do something about it. If they don't, then we just do what we're doing, what seems to work for them. As long as the feedback I'm getting from them is good, then we just stay that course. Perimenopause is when everything goes off a cliff. And all right,
yeah,
I did not
just does. It's a fuck show. I don't know.
So for myself, as I said, I wasn't involved in any kind of athletic pursuit where that made a difference at that stage of my life. I was probably in some perimenopause when I was running, but because that was a new sport to me, anything I did was an improvement. Sure. It didn't matter. It didn't matter, right? Getting more activity is always going to help your body composition, no matter what stage you're in. Having to focus on fueling, right? Because now you're getting more activity, you have to fuel better, is going to give you a better body. So I kind of didn't have any of that. I have worked with a couple of athletes that were like, what the fuck? I'm training the same way I've always trained. I've been a runner all my life, and all of a sudden I don't recognize the body I'm in. That's when we kind of have to step in and go, okay, we need to do some interventions here to try and make this work. As you know, women in perimenopause do not have a normal cycle. They can go, one cycle is a week long and another cycle is 6 months long. So therefore, it's very difficult to track where they are within that cycle. And a lot of times that just goes out the window anyway, because their progesterone and estrogen aren't in sync like they used to be. Some women are progesterone heavy, some women are estrogen heavy when they're going through perimenopause. So you kind of just go, okay, we really need to be in communication a lot. I need feedback every day on how you're doing. What can we do to make your programming fit when you're feeling good and when you're not feeling good? How do we make that work? And sometimes it is on a daily basis. I hate to say it. Sometimes it has to be, 100%. And then when you get to postmenopause, it's actually easier.
Yes, it is.
Right? Because everything has flatlined. You no longer have those spikes. And now we can really start to implement something on a regular basis. And a lot of times that means the exact opposite of what a lot of ultra runners want to do. And that's
shut this door if you're a dog about
sure.
Okay. Yeah.
So what don't ultra runners want to do? Less miles. Right?
Always and forever. Yes. More.
Yes.
Always. Yes.
Yep. But here's the undisputed scientific facts, right? Women, especially menopausal women, are excellent endurance athletes. We are excellent fat burners, and don't even get me started on that whole crusade because I'm not going there. But
Yep.
we are excellent endurance athletes, and especially if you're someone like me, who's I'm an experienced ultra runner. I've been running now for 10, more than 10 years. I'm not going to give away. I'm 58. So I'm very into postmenopause. But so I've been running for what, 12, 15, whatever it is.
Sure.
So I'm very experienced. So you and I both know in programming for an experienced ultra runner, you don't need that high mileage.
100%.
Right.
And
Right.
like,
How long is my
it can be
longest long run
separated.
supposed to be? And
Yeah, fuck.
right.
And like if we look at Camille, right, even she's talking about like, I mean, even if
Exactly.
for her, right, she runs 120-mile weeks, but it's all these like short, I mean, short for
Yeah.
me, it's
Yeah.
would fucking destroy me. But for someone of her
Right.
caliber, it's like very short
Yep.
sections that's just repeated.
Yep.
So yeah, 100%.
Well, and the funny thing is, going off topic a little bit with Camille, if you've read or looked at her training, she still does 20-mile, 22-mile long runs.
Mhm.
That, so I think what she's talking about where you don't need long is doing like 50-mile, 60-mile long runs. Nobody
Yes.
fucking needs that. Okay.
I
don't care who you are. Nobody
Yeah.
needs to have that. And
She
I'm
also
sure
talks about it in terms of time, right? Too, which I think is like very relevant in this
well,
conversation to some degree.
it is. Circle back to that because I
Please,
have
yeah.
something to say about that.
I would love that. Yeah.
So anyway, we are excellent endurance athletes. What we need as older athletes is more high intensity, right? More sit training, more weight training, shorter, harder intervals. I still do long runs. But I'll tell you, I did not do. So my last training cycle was a little different because I didn't need a qualifier for the 100-miler because I already had one. So I did not do. I think I did a 50K. That was my longest training run, and the only reason I did that is because it was a race I wanted to support here in Vermont. Not like I needed it for my training. So if not for that race, I probably wouldn't have done longer than a 25-mile training run, and I completed a 100-miler on that.
That's awesome.
I think it's fair to say you can probably do that. I think too many people beat their bodies up too much and they arrive at the start line broken.
I fully
agree.
Yeah.
So
that,
yeah,
like a couple of roads to take there. Like one is, I mean, the time thing I would like to circle back to, but first, you are, and I have this in my hand because I'm taking notes, but if you are experienced, would this be different for someone newer?
Yes, it would have to be, right? And this is going to tie nice little segue into the time thing. This is going to put a nice little bow right on top of it.
I was hoping that would work. Cool.
Yes. So a lot of us, we're a new runner or an older runner, or we're just plain fucking slow, right? Some of us aren't born with a lot of fast twitch fibers. I'm convinced that's me. I'm the
exact opposite. So yes, I feel you. Yeah.
100%. So I'm a back of the packer. I finished the Vermont 100 with 15 minutes to spare and was questioning the whole last 20 miles. Am I going to be able to keep up this effort to get there? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's shrink that down to even someone doing a marathon. You're in a marathon training plan. Marathon's 26 miles, right? A lot of in that space say anything over 3 hours, you're asking for an injury, right? 3-hour training run. And I think a lot of other coaches I'm not saying there's anything wrong with time-based training, because most of my athletes are actually a combination, right? Due to their work, daily life, we'll give them time-based workouts during the week, but then we're going to give them mileage-based workouts on the weekend. Why is that? Because they're slower, back of the pack runners, and I would be irresponsible. Say they could only do 15 miles in 3 hours. I'm going to ask them to do 26 miler in a race? Hell no, not doing it. I'm just not doing it. So my ultra athletes, same thing. If they're doing a 50K, I'm not going to stop them at a 3 hour, 4 hour, 5 hour training run. I can't. That would be irresponsible of me to not help them get that impact training, and that what does it feel like to be on my feet for this long, and how can you train your gut for an 8 or 9 or 10 hour race when you've only done 3 hours. Personally, I think that's how I feel. Maybe I'm wrong, and I wish someone would prove me right, but that's why I don't do it.
And I completely agree with you, and I want to like dial in on that gut point and some other shit. So like we can talk about tendons and bone structure and everything about the 3 hour whatever, right? Like fine. Right. I think if you're going to run for 12 hours or plus, it's going to be like, it's really hard to know if your gut's going to be good enough on a 3 hour run. And when we know that like so much recovery and stamina and bone health like maintains with food intake, like at the very least, I need to know if your fucking fueling plan is going to work. And that's going to be 5-6 hours. I don't know, a while. So yeah, I agree. And especially if you're newer,
right?
Let's find some stuff out, man. Yeah, I agree completely.
Yep. If you're an experienced runner, like I said, you already have all of those systems are usually pretty well adapted to distance running. So we can back off on those long miles. And this is for, menopausal women, older men, same thing. We can back off on those miles, add in some, like a couple of days a week or high intensity, whether that's a workout on the track or, some VO2 max intervals or some tempo intervals or what have you. Getting a couple of days a week of those shorter, higher intensity workouts amongst your long, slow distance, I think is really important for the menopausal athlete, especially, because we lose those. We know estrogen is the primary driver for muscle protein synthesis. There's no disputing that. That's period, end of conversation. So we need to find,
for the record, it's fucking mandatory. Yeah.
Right. So we need to find something else to stimulate that muscle protein synthesis. And we found the best way to do that is with sit and hit training and heavy strength training. So
I think most people probably heard of high intensity interval training, the hit stuff. What would you define sit, please? Because I don't think
it's sprint interval training.
Thank you.
So either on a bike or on a treadmill, you're doing like 30-second hard intervals and then a 30-second easier. So it's the same thing as hit, only a different mechanism.
Yep. Thanks. So if we look at like kind of on this point, let's dial back to come back to the intensity stuff. If we look at these really long runs, like do you ever do back-to-back with people? Do you find that there's a bigger need for recovery? And then on pardon me, and then on the term like note of muscle protein synthesis, like food intake, like how do you adjust that for people?
Yeah,
I realize you're not a dietitian, but like we all talk about food occasionally. So
that's two questions that I apologize for that. I know I shut my iMessage off and I just got one, so I apologize for that.
All right.
So my senior brain already forgot the question you asked me.
So back to back, like do you?
Back to back, yeah. So there's a lot of controversy around that, right? A lot of people swear by it. A lot of people don't swear by it. They say it's not necessary. Again, it's a case by case basis with my athletes. a lot of times they want one simply because that's what's in all the cut and dried training plans, right? So they feel like they're leaving something on the table. So if they're a younger runner, I may throw one in, and it won't be something huge. It'll be like a 20 on Saturday and a 10 on Sunday, right? Just it appeases that, oh my God, if my athletes are going to listen to this, they're going to know my secrets now.
I do the same shit basically enough. So yeah, I hear you.
Appeases them. It does give you, like Jason says, it does give you a big training stimulus in a short amount of time. There is something to be said for that.
And it forces you to take your recovery seriously, which I also
it
really
forces
appreciate.
it does. But here's the thing: your coach has to make sure they program that recovery in there, right? Mm-hmm. And then sometimes if you do that, like for me, I will, if an athlete does a back-to-back weekend, their next week is a dramatic cut in mileage. And they may only have like 2-3 mile runs during the week and a 5 on the weekend. They're like, oh my God, like my training's going to look.
Yeah, the next week looks like a taper. Yeah.
And I think the key point that a lot of people miss out on, and this is whether you're a menopausal athlete or not, is, we know this stuff because we're well versed in physiology. The average layperson is not. That's why they hire us, right? So when one of my athletes flips out because they feel like they're missing a week of training, I ask them the question, when do you think your training adaptation occurs? Well, it occurs when you do a run. No, it doesn't. It occurs when you're resting and recovering. That's when the adaptations happen. It's not during the workout, it's after the workout, which ties into your other question, right? Let's talk about the food window. So a lot of controversy around that as well. But I look at it this way. If it's not going to hurt you, why not do it, right? And Dr. Sims and other people in the space say to get that dose of protein and carbs as soon as possible after a workout. Well, it's not going to hurt you. So why not do it? Regardless of whether there's controversy around whether it's necessary, doesn't matter. And bring a protein shake and a banana with you. Eat it in the car on the way home. What's the problem?
And I had one today. And honestly, they've shown so much about this, and it's a lot of recent studies, and it's fascinating to me. But at the end of the day, like your overall calorie intake is the most important, calories and protein and whatever. But like your overall intake is what matters most. And then we need to get a few doses of protein. And if you're running for 5 hours, when the fuck are you going to do that? Is my biggest question, right? So like if you need to intake 150 grams of protein in a day, and theoretically that should be in 3 or 4 doses, and you're split into 5 hours of your day is running,
right? Take
the shake 100%. I couldn't agree more.
Yep. So that's the biggest thing. And with menopausal women, there's going to be some controversy around, because there always is, right? Because one study will say one thing and one study will say another, and you kind of have to look and see who did it, blah, blah, blah. Absolutely. Is we kind of need to, so it's no secret that our body composition changes. Absolutely. We start to put on more body fat. We actually get more fat in our muscles, sarcopenia. And it's because we no longer have the protection of our hormones, right? Those are what drive all of this, a healthy body composition, all of that. So, and we also know that that's what drives production and, blood glucose regulation and all of that stuff. So our best way to fight that is to watch when we're eating our carbs and what kind of carbs they are, right? We want to have those carbs in and around our workouts when that activity is now what's fueling the blood glucose control and things like that, because our hormones no longer do it. That's the best time for us to eat that. So having a little bit of carbs before your workout and then some carbs and protein after your workout. So if there's controversy around it, who cares? It doesn't hurt you. It can only help you. So just do it. Just do it. Right.
Agreed. Couldn't agree more. And like some of the MPS stuff is by like Andy Galpin and Schoenberg and all these people, and they're very interesting. But it's also like I love Stacy Sims. I really do. I think she is serving a like deeply underserved population, and that is just women in general, and especially menopausal or around menopausal women. And if we look at a general intake of data, then BCAAs don't do shit. However, if your MPS is greatly reduced and you struggle to intake protein, then they can be changing, right? So yeah, I think trying to not take it by a case basis is irresponsible, honestly. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yep. I mean, let's face it, we do see, I see a lot of women in my age demographic at 5Ks or at ultra marathons who don't look like me, right? So maybe there's something about, you know, we know that both of us have flat hormones, right? That's not, but maybe there's something to it that not everyone's body composition responds the same way. Maybe it's a genetic component, maybe it's, I don't know. You know, so I can understand why there's people refuting some of these suggestions, right? Because, well, the science says or doesn't say, or, but you know what, at the end of the day, like I said, if it's not going to hurt you, it's the same with a lot of these recovery modalities, right? Whether it's the Theragun or, you know, the boots, or they're not going to hurt you. They're not going to hurt you.
Yeah.
If it makes you feel better, then do it.
Yeah.
Then do it, right? What's the problem?
Yeah, no, I agree. If it's not going to hurt you, I couldn't agree more. I'm here rolling out my PF right now, and I know it's questionable whether it's actually working, but it sure helps it feel better. So I don't care. So yeah, I think again, case by case is really where we are.
And as far as the protein shakes, you know, Dr. Sims look, no one lives in a perfect world, or very few of us live in a perfect world where we can do all the right things. Yes, it's always better to get your nutrients from real food, but some of us struggle for one reason or another. Like right now, I'm actually having some dental issues. So I can't eat some of my normal protein sources. Protein shake it is. I mean, it's better than not having it.
100%.
Right? So,
yeah,
don't be afraid of that.
And then especially like my hunger response is not great post-exercise. I can put down liquids though. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
So
I don't have that problem.
Great. I'm glad for you.
I don't have, oh my God.
Terrible. But then I get that like rebound effect where I was like, oh, let me eat 4,000 calories in dinner. So yeah, it's for different reasons. It's just a chore.
So my husband's his usual modus operandi after I do a long run is to have a family-sized pizza waiting. And I shit you not, dude, we will eat the entire thing for dinner.
I love that.
I'm not kidding.
I fully believe you. I mean, as someone who could put down one of those myself, like I'm sure that post long run, if you have a hunger response, yeah, that's great. That's delightful.
Yes, it is.
So we've talked about recovery and back to back and like judging kind of like based on time and whatnot. What changes, and I realize again, case by case, but what shifts do you think need to happen as women take the like 5 to 10 years and go from nothing to peri to pre to, or pre to peri to menopause post? What shifts happen?
So the important thing to remember is that unfortunately, we just can't do the same thing that we used to do. So something has to change.
Got it.
That's the number one thing. You can't keep beating your head against the wall and eating cleaner food and exercising more. Sometimes that actually has the opposite effect, right? Everyone thinks that if they're not responding to the training, they need more training, when honestly, you probably need less, or you need different training. And usually that's a combination of the two. As I said, a reduction in mileage, an increase in some of that higher intensity stuff, watching what you're eating and when. Obviously, we need those simple carbs during activity because our bodies can't break down anything else quick enough. But before and after, try to reach for something that's a little less of the simple carbs, legumes, whole grains, things like that that are a little more complex. And then when you're going into post menopause, it really becomes more important to incorporate more rest and recovery. I personally, myself and most of my menopausal athletes, we don't do more. Our peak weeks, even going into a 100-miler, is like 50 or 55 miles. But it's that those miles are more quality than just, I'm going to go out and do long, slow distance, because we don't need that. We don't need to train our bodies to use fat better. Most of us are experienced. We don't need the long runs to test, fueling, maybe to test some new gear or something. You might, do a 50K self-supported 50K long run or something like that to test out other stuff. But as far as the training goes, you just don't need that anymore. And bonus, when Jason was talking at the conference about like the 3 weeks on and the 1 week off, myself and all of my menopausal athletes are generally a 2 week on or 1 week off, sometimes even a 1 week on or 1 week off. If I'm seeing a lot of unhappy faces in their feedback through Training Peaks and things are going, circling the drain, then we revert to a 1 week on and 1 week off. And maybe that means we leave a little training on the table. Maybe that means they don't get, the 25 miler that they wanted to get before their 50 mile. They might only get a 20 miler. But at the end of the day, what's the point in training if you show up on race day exhausted and broken? Right? That's just dumb.
Yeah, for sure. And
so
on one end, like we're reducing the steps, right? So I mean, like reducing the size of our up steps, but this, because like all training is like up and then back and then up and back and up and back. Yep. Where this might be a little more jagged. Love that idea. That's great. And then if we look at, do you taper longer? Like, does that change as well? Because I've heard different things on this, so I would love your input on that.
So that, I think, I don't think that has anything to do with what stage of life you're in or what gender you're in or even what experience you have. I think some people, my husband, when he was a runner, absolutely didn't even do a taper because he would feel dull and just completely not even wanting to race when it came to marathon day. So he didn't really do a taper. Myself, I've always been like the 3 week taper type thing. It's always worked really well for me. And again, that's a conversation I have with my athletes. What has been, if you have any experience at all, what has been your experience with in the past with races? Do you feel good going into a race after a 3 week taper? Do you feel like shit? Do you like, I use a lot of their feedback to build their plan. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If they don't have any experience, well, then we kind of have to, lick the dart and throw it at the dartboard and see what happens. Right? Their first race, maybe 100%. They do a 3 week taper. And if they didn't feel good for whatever reason, if they felt like my husband says, he just felt dull and not inspired at all, then the next time we'll maybe try a 2 week taper, or maybe we'll try something different during the taper to keep them fresh. Whether that means doing a track workout where another coach might not have given them one. So there's just a bunch of different things that you can play around with and be really creative to try and get them to the start line in as best shape as possible, given all of these other things that life keeps throwing at us as menopausal women.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess another question on that would be HRT. And I know you're not a doctor, right? But like my mom's very open about being on it, and it's like helped her immensely. We have different stuff. And what is your experience? Like, what is your experience with it, with you and your clients and all these things? Like, I don't know if you're on it or not, but what do we have for HRT?
Hey everyone, I've decided to stop doing ads for this podcast, at least for the time being. I just don't think they're a good use of anybody's time. So instead of that, I just have a simple ask. If you find this information valuable, please tell someone about it. Either hit the like or subscribe buttons on your preferred platform, share it with somebody, or you could even just head over to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Group on Facebook, and I'd appreciate that as well. I'm just trying to make more good, free information for people so we can all get better at running on the trails. And if we can spread the tribe, that would be great. Thank you, and let's get to the podcast.
So I am not, because years ago, that was the thing to do. Mm-hmm. Every menopausal woman went on HRT, mm-hmm. right? Which now they call it menopausal hormone therapy. Okay. So they call it MHT now.
No.
I guess that's the politically correct. I don't know. I'm okay. Don't even get me started on politically correct either. Because we can go for a while on that. But anyway, so of course, there's the scary studies out there. Oh my God, it gives you heart disease and blah, 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 and all this other stuff. Well, that was very, very specific demographic. That study
argues that study was so roughly done that it's not even worthwhile. So yes,
it's not even worthwhile anymore. No. Yeah. But the mindset has changed. So everyone was on it, then no one was on it because of the study that everyone flipped out over. And now it's more so, doctors will generally put you on hormone therapy if you are having life-altering symptoms.
Yeah.
Whether the hot flashes are so bad that you're not sleeping.
That's my mom. Right. So she's
other things. Women hate me because I had like one hot flash and that was it.
Oh shit.
I know. My biggest symptom, or I guess it's symptom, whatever, of menopause has been the change in body composition. And unfortunately, that is the one thing that exogenous hormones will not take care of, is body fat. For whatever reason, it's slightly different, right? It's a slightly different chemical composition. And maybe that's enough to make it not, fit in the receptor sites. I don't know. But the bottom line is menopause hormone therapy will not do anything for body recomposition. So that's why I never went on it. I do have an athlete who's on therapy. She has now, here's the thing. She started that very close to the time when she and I started working together. And I started changing the way she was doing her lifting and her workouts and things like that. So she's feeling great, but which is it? Is it a combination of the two? Sure. Is it the hormones? Is it the training? We don't know. All we know is that she's feeling great, so we are not going to upset the apple cart, right?
Yeah.
So absolutely. When it comes to that, I think if your athlete is having serious, like they call it life-altering symptoms, then it's probably a good idea, depending on where they are in their life stage. I think they say within 10 years of the onset of menopause, I think is beyond that, they really don't like to do it because that's when the heart issues start coming in, I think.
Yeah, and then you have some brain stuff as well, actually. Like I think
exactly.
Stroke is actually what they're really worried about now or something. But
right,
decade is the last I heard, though. That number definitely sticks in my head.
Yeah. So I mean, at the end of the day, it's their decision, right? It's obviously their decision. And then you need to work within, stay within your lane of working with that.
Of course. Yeah. I would not advise anything other than please go talk to your doctor. Right.
Yep. Like that. Yep. Yeah. But I would not hesitate, even with those athletes who are on menopause hormone therapy, to do the HIIT, to do the sit, to do the heavy lifting, to do the nutritional interventions. Because it's just going to enhance that, right? So maybe the hormone therapy is helping with their blood glucose, but we can make it even better by doing the heavy lifting and the nutritional interventions and other things. We can always improve on it, right?
Absolutely. And I don't know, I haven't necessarily been skirting around it, but I feel like let's like touch the mildly obfuscated elephant in the room. So we're worried a little bit about getting fat, right? So I mean, I think that's that's a thing. And I've talked about this a lot. Like I have a long history with diet stuff with myself.
Yep.
To the end of like body dysmorphia and some orthorexia and all sorts of shit, because I
Yep.
have not the healthiest body image. So
I don't either, so don't feel bad.
yeah, I don't think most of us do, very honestly, right? And I think to some degree, I really appreciated the general conversation I see with most of the people I respect now, where it's like, just fucking eat the food and fuel so that you don't get hurt. Because part of the reason that I'm riddled with injuries is because I was training like a crazy person while also greatly restricting my food because I wanted to have an 8-pack or maintain one or whatever the fuck, depending on the cycle in life. And I really liked that shift. And I think if it were there more when I was a teenager, I would be less fucked up. However, we still care, right? So I think to some degree, how do we find that balance where, especially when we are leaning a little bit into increased risk of osteopenia and sarcopenia, and I mean, some of that's just going to happen. We still need to eat, especially if we have a high training volume. Like, how do you have that conversation in a way that doesn't belittle the fact that most of us want to look some kind of way? I don't care what that is. Very honestly, it doesn't matter. But most of us have our image preferences. And if you want to maintain that while also training heavily, how do you have that conversation in a way that's not both belittling or destructive?
Right. So the first conversation I have with myself or with one of my athletes, no, this is serious. So
no, I laughed out of knowing. Yes, 100%. I have this like talk down from the ledge moment on like a weekly basis, and I'm pretty open about it. So yes, please. Thank you.
So at the end of the day, we can't ignore the mental component, right, of all of this. So the first conversation I have with them is, or myself, is look at what you've done. Look at what you've done. Okay. So when my husband and I went to Flagstaff a few years ago, we signed up for a 15K, which after 2 days of being there, we went to packet pickup and said, can we drop down to the 5K? Because we realized this was dumb. Right.
A 7,000 foot increase in elevation will do some stuff for sure.
We'll do some stuff. And bonus, that race was even higher because it was at the Arizona Snow Bowl.
Oh yeah.
So it started at like 8,500 feet, right? And went up from right. So after huffing my way around Buffalo Park for one day, I'm like, I'm dropping to the 5K. That was just dumb.
That's amazing.
Surprisingly enough, I came in third in my age group. So my Instagram post was, this fluffy flatlander just kicked the ass of, the elevation queens, whatever I said, right? But my point is, I embrace that, right? I don't look like Camille Herron. I don't look like Courtney DeWalter, yet I still finished that fucking 100-miler, right? And I finished ahead of some people. I passed a lot of people that didn't finish the race because they got cut off, right? So at the end of the day, you have to embrace the fact that your body can move you for that marathon or that 50K or that 100-miler, right? So don't beat it up. Don't make fun of it. Don't put it down. That body moved you for 100 miles. Okay. With that being said, we have to remember that food is not a reward. Food is not a punishment. Food is fuel. Okay. And we have to fuel your body for the work that you are asking it to do. And like you said, there's been lots of talk probably over the past 10 years now of, red S and low energy availability and all that stuff. If you haven't read Kara Goucher's or Lauren Fleshman's books yet, those have to be on your list. They go into that in great detail in the elite world of how that's destroying women's and men's bodies.
Yeah.
By
they're coming out,
you know, yeah. So we don't want that to happen, right? So at the end of the day, your body needs to be fueled for what you're asking it to do. Now, with that being said, this extra activity that you're asking it to do is going to help reshape your body. It's going to help you, get rid of some of that fat mass and build up some of that lean muscle mass. Because here's the problem that a lot of people don't understand. When you go into a heavy calorie restriction like that, you lose a lot of muscle mass. It's not fat you're losing. There was just an article the other day on Apple News about the military now having to deal with this problem of the skinny fat, right? Yeah. So these guys are thin, but they have no muscle mass. So that's kind of a problem. It's a problem for the job, and it's a problem for them in longevity in their life, right? So that's a problem for us too. So when you go into these calorie restrictions, oftentimes, unfortunately, you're losing lean muscle mass along with some of that body fat. We don't want that, especially as menopausal women. We want to hang on to what we have. Yeah. We're already going to lose it because we've lost that estrogen protector and the estrogen driver of the muscle protein synthesis. So we want to hang on to what we have. We have to eat, period, end of conversation. So the way we try to counter that is, what are we eating, right? Is that calorie intake pumpkin pie, or is it, a chicken sandwich? Now you can have the pumpkin pie. I'm not saying not to, because I do, but generally speaking, you kind of want to give yourself nutrient dense foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, protein, lean protein, things like that. You want to try and get that carbs, those high carbs around in and around your workouts. And you certainly want to get the carbs and protein post workout. And I've even seen some studies that say a dose of protein later in the evening isn't a bad idea either, whether that's some yogurt or protein shake or, whatever. Because when does your body recover? While you're sleeping. So give it that amino acid pool that it needs to rebuild what you've broken down during training.
Absolutely.
So if you do that, generally speaking, things are going to move in the right direction. If they don't, that's when it's time for an intervention from a dietitian or, someone who's in that space. Because I'm not in that space. I stay in my own lane. I don't write meal plans for my athletes, any of that shit. But if they're still not happy with the way things are going, then I will refer them to someone who knows more than me.
Yeah, I agree. Love that. And yeah, I appreciate that, because it is it's a tough balance to hit.
Yeah.
And this is why Instagram and everything is great. It brings us together across the country. Is how I've connected with Heather before going to this conference, etc. But it's also everything. It's a 1 minute soundbite, and that was a 20-minute answer. So
right,
it's hard to figure this out. So thanks.
Agreed.
So, what else would you like to touch on that I've missed?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I don't think you've missed anything. We've kind of woven, a lot into that. How I approach my training as a menopausal athlete, how I approach coaching menopausal athletes, nutrition interventions, the need for more rest, the need for higher intensity, less long, slow distance. I mean, that's pretty much a lot of it in a nutshell. And definitely, if you are having life-altering symptoms from menopause, please talk to your doctor. As they brought up at the conference, one of the best things for us is sleep. And unfortunately, that's one of the things that takes a hit when we go into perimenopause and postmenopause, is our ability to get good sleep. So I think that's kind of a crux of it. If you're not getting good sleep, you need to do something about it. And that's something I can tell you what's worked for me, but because I'm not a doctor, I'm not in that space. I say, talk to your doctor about it. And if your doctor says, oh, that's normal, there's nothing you can do about it, find another fucking doctor.
Thank you.
Yeah. I had myself and a few other people had a conversation with someone in a Facebook group, talking about this very thing, about low energy availability, red S, except it was in the respect of having no period. And this girl was like chimed in because someone was asking a question about that. And this girl chimed in, yeah, that happens to me. And I talked to my doctor and he said, that's just normal for female athletes. We're like, whoa, wait a second. Your doctor obviously hasn't been reading any of the science over the past 20 years. That's not normal. Like, that shouldn't be happening. And she's like, well, I'm going to listen to my doctor over you guys. And we're like, okay, you go ahead and do that. But we're all telling you, there's like 10 of us telling you that's not normal. And conversations like what you're proposing and doctors like your doctor are the ones that are perpetuating the problem.
God, this shit gives me a headache. Yeah, I had someone who iron, right? She is not in menopause at all yet, and her iron was like just below the reference range, and her doctor was like, it's fine. And I was like, you run 70 miles a week, please find a new doctor.
Yeah.
The fuck. So yes, thank you. I agree. Second opinions are you are allowed to get one. Yes.
And not to give a plug to Inside Tracker, I am an Inside Tracker pro, but that was something that was brought up at the conference, and there was some folks that said, oh, I don't think it's necessary. But here's the thing, and I wasn't going to dispute that, but I'm going to dispute it here, because I'm a user of Inside Tracker, and several of my athletes are users of Inside Tracker. The biggest difference between what you will get from your doctor, by and large, I'm not saying, but what you will get from your doctor versus what you will get from Inside Tracker is the ranges are vastly different. What's normal for a sedentary human is not normal for an athlete running 70 miles a week or 50 miles a week or 100 miles a week, or a triathlete, training 20 hours a week. Those ranges, they're different.
Yes.
So just because the doctor's range is, she's in range, I will bet if you put that up against what Inside Tracker's range is for her age demographic, her gender, and her activity level, it's going to be way out of spec.
So, I mean, this entire subset here on my bookshelf is actually all about like nutrition certs and stuff that I've taken. And
I can see that's precision nutrition. I've done that too.
And then a few other ones to the right of it as well that were like more in depth. And they her ranges were well out of the optimal for an athlete, like not even close.
Yep.
So yes, I was very frustrated. I think in general, if your doctor is not used to, it's like going to a doctor and being like them telling you, well, running's bad for your knees, so just stop. Your shit's 30 years out of date. Maybe we should have a new conversation if you can, if it's possible. I realize our medical industry is not stellar with being in and out of network and whatever. And like people have heard me tirade on this with my whole asthma struggle, so I'm not going to get into it. But it's like, if you can, find another one.
Yep.
Please.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So I guess I remembered one more thing I wanted to ask you was strength work. I am a huge proponent. It's actually what I do more than I do run coaching, even on a daily basis. And like, what have you seen for strength work when it comes to older athletes, I guess? And I don't mean elderly. I mean, really.
No, masters athletes.
I mean, in my role as anybody over 40, we have a conversation to some degree. So what's your experience?
Yep. So again, you have to consider the athlete's history. My husband's an ex-powerlifter. He's been lifting since he was 14 years old, right? So he can leg press 400 or 500 pounds, whatever it is he does, and he's had knee surgery, so it's less than what it used to be. But if I have an athlete, a menopausal athlete coming to me, she's been running for years and years and years, but she's never lifted. Well, guess what? We're not going to start off with lifting heavy, even though we know that's what we need to work towards.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to start off with body weights. And then when she's, feeling better, then we're going to add some other stuff and, focus on the stuff that matters, the bench press, the squat, and the deadlift. Right. Mm-hmm. And we can do the ancillary stuff because maybe you want to, for myself, so we're planning on going to do the Tour de Mont Blanc next year.
Oh,
not the race, the tour.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
I realize I'm going to have to use poles. I've never used poles before, mainly because Vermont doesn't allow them. So, the Vermont 100 doesn't allow them. So I've just never bothered.
Sure.
But I do realize that's going to send my biceps and triceps into outer space. So,
your lats will probably also light up. Yeah, 100%.
I'm adding some skull crushers and I'm adding some hammer curls and, things like that you wouldn't necessarily associate with heavy lifting. But those need to be healthy and strong too. Right. So it's again, like, I hate to keep sounding like a fucking parrot, and repeating the same thing over and over and saying that it depends, but it really does depend. It depends on where the athlete is in their lifting career. It depends on what they have available. Right. Some people live in remote areas. They don't have a lot at their disposal. We have to be creative. Is it ideal? No, but it's what they can do. Right.
Absolutely.
I think that's the crux of it. At the end of the day, we can't always do what's ideal. We have to do what fits. One of my biggest pet peeves is seeing all of these articles and books that say train like a pro, race like a pro. You can't do that because guess what? That's their job. That's their job. They spend 40 hours a week running, lifting, massage, sports therapy, or, sports psychology, like all of that stuff. That's their job. And then they can spend the rest of the time recovering. That's not your job. Your job might be working 40 hours a week and having 2 kids and having a husband who goes on business trips. Now, how do you expect to run 150 miles a week and do all this strength training? You can't. The answer is you're going to break yourself and you're going to end up really injured.
Yeah.
So we look at what the ideal is, and then we scale it back to what fits into your life and your abilities.
Yeah.
Right.
No, for sure. And I couldn't agree more. That's why I do a very long video assessment, like movement assessment, where we do strength training. And I'll say for one note, if anybody's confused on where they are, most of the current progress seems to show that it's effort. So if you get within a rep or two of failure, no matter what your exercise is, and a failure, I mean form failure. So can't move yourself anymore, but form starts to break down, you will make progress, period. And that's
right.
And so for me, I could back squat 300 pounds for 2, or I could do some single leg stuff for more than that, but still maintain good form. And either way, my legs will get stronger. Right. So, and I'm sure your husband would say the same from what he's experienced. It's just put in hard work. It's just like running. Go do hard work, and
you have to go do it.
Yeah, and you'll make progress. So
absolutely.
Thanks, Faith. I really appreciate it. I feel like I have this conversation a lot where I try. So I do create, and I know I do because I have this conversation with a lot of my athletes, but it's we'll often lead in with it's maybe too much information, but I'm on my period or on my cycle or whatever. And it's if that could go away, I would be super happy, because I mean, it's just part of life for half the population, and then it's part of life for the rest of us because we're in the population. So periods are a thing. It's just what it is. And the more that we normalize this conversation, the happier I think everybody can be. So thank you so much for coming on here and having this chat.
Yep. And I will tell you, I will add this, having taken Dr. Sim's courses and, done a lot of my own reading and such, this is largely an American problem. It's largely a United States problem. Just like you go to Europe, you see boobs in commercials. US is oh my God, it's boobs. So, Japanese women don't have the stigma around menstrual cycles and menopause. They have healthier menopausal women because they don't have the stigma around it.
Yep.
And that's a fact. European the same way. And it all boils down to the fact that I feel like in this country, we need to apologize for everything. Right. You're watching some show where a woman's talking about, her husband passing away, and she starts crying and she's like, oh, I'm sorry. What are you sorry for? Why are you apologizing for crying on national television? Because so why are we apologizing for saying, oh, well, I'm expecting my period on race day. What do I do? Why is that so taboo? And it's largely an American thing. I hate to say it, but it's true.
I agree. I lived abroad for 2 years. It's like, I know for a fact this is true. Yeah, 100%. And I wish I could close on that, but you actually just brought up a thing that I really wanted to ask you. So training during your period, if you know you're going to have a period on race day, and then we were talking about like training around your cycle, do you train through it to practice? Like, this is actually a question I kind of do have, because it's not a thing I've ever experienced.
And you know what? And unfortunately, there's a lot of other things to consider, right? So yes, it is a good idea. I think for multiple reasons. Number one, because you figure out what products are going to work well for you, right? Some chafe more than others. Some, aren't really great. They're not packable as far as, so you need to figure out what's going to work for you physically, but you also need to figure out how you're going to deal with that on race day. If there's no porta potty available or something, like, how are you going to deal with this? So you should practice that just like you do anything else, practicing your fueling, practicing your hydration, practicing your gear, shoes, whatever. You should practice, how am I going to deal with this? And I know a lot of women, makes me crazy. I'm going to try to keep this short because I realize this has been a really long interview.
So half an hour still, you're fine. Yeah.
So when you're on an OCP, oral contraceptive, you don't have a cycle anymore. That's a fake cycle. You don't have regular hormonal cycling, none of that. It's a fake cycle. So women feel like they can just take an extra week of pills and delay their period. Okay, I guess you can, because you're not normal cycling. But at the end of the day, it's just not a good idea to do. Like, just deal with it. I'm sorry, it's not a big deal. I used to do 50-mile endurance races on my horse dealing with that. All right. It's not a big fucking deal. Deal with it.
I agree. It's a tough thing.
But you should train and test things to see what works and what doesn't work for you and how you can best deal with it. Right.
Yeah.
And don't be taking NSAIDs on race day to deal with the cramping, because your kidneys will not thank you.
Don't take that shit seriously.
No.
If we could take one thing away from forever, just don't take NSAIDs on race day or in heavy training cycles. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Cool.
Yep.
It just made me laugh about Coop very clearly clarifying to an entire group of professionals that he was recommending very low dose Tylenol instead of Advil.
Yes.
It was Tylenol. Yeah, don't take fucking NSAIDs on race day.
Right.
100%. All right, Faith. And then last question before we get going is, like, where can people find you and all of the things that, if people want to reach out to you, how do they do that?
So physically, you can find me in Vermont. That's where I live now. But my website is runlongrunstrong.com. And I'm not on Twitter because I can't be on too many social media platforms.
You're better.
But Instagram is Run Long Run Strong Endurance. And you can find me on Facebook at Run Long Run Strong Endurance Coaching LLC.
Awesome. Thank you, Faith. I really appreciate it. And this was really, I don't know, this is great. Yeah, I don't talk about this a ton other than from the very sciencey perspective. So I really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
Everybody, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. And we'll be back with another one soon. Thank you for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Honestly, I'm still surprised and honored that anybody wants to hear what I have to say, so thank you. To be clear, not a doctor, nor a registered dietitian, or any other kind of medical professional. I'm a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, and a running coach, and I have a passion for training trail runners. You should always speak with a qualified medical professional before making any changes to your training or nutrition program. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please take a second to leave a rating or review. I'd really appreciate it. Or you could just share it with someone for whom you think it might be helpful. I make these kinds of things in order to provide more quality, free resources to people, so the more people who hear it, the better. If you want more of this information, please head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training group on Facebook, where we discuss all aspects of training so you can have more fun doing the sport that you love. Thank you again for listening.